Mhm.
Welcome to another episode of Trust Builders. I am very excited about today's episode because I get to talk to my long term client and friend, Barry Angel. Barry is the CEO of a company called Juriba. He co founded the company, Barry, about 15 years ago?
Yeah, 15, 16 years
And
ago
we've
now.
known each other about 10 of those. And Juriba is a B2B software provider. Basically, you help large companies manage their Windows application and devices at scale and make it super easy to do that.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and we've been obviously, morphing what the company does over the last 15, 16 years, but primarily we're still looking after large enterprise estates and looking after their PCs and laptops and applications.
Awesome. So I invited you today on the show because when we started working together, you've done something absolutely amazing. And even though it's been almost 10 years ago, this thing has continued to pay off until this day, and it's built a tremendous amount of trust. And I'm talking about the Windows 7 migration project template that you put together way back when. Can you explain to us what it is and why did you create it?
Yeah, so when we were founding Juriba and we were looking to really understand what our customers needed in terms of the products that we were selling, one of the large opportunities for us was around operating system migrations, Windows 7 to, or sorry, Windows XP to 7, I believe it was at the time. And one of the things that we felt that was missing in the market was a project plan that people could just go and download. So essentially a template that someone who was a Windows 7 project manager in a large enterprise could essentially download this. It would be a complete project plan. So we're very keen that it wasn't just a framework with a few tasks in it. It was a complete plan that you could actually use and tweak. And the idea ultimately being that if we could provide some piece of collateral that was useful for the target persona that we had for our software, then this would hopefully be a door opener for us in terms of we would understand that this customer had a Windows 7 migration project because they were downloading a project plan for it. So it was extremely tied together in terms of a need from the customer and something that we could provide in terms of value. But essentially, it was a hundreds of lines project plan that obviously included a section for our software in it and the acceleration that would provide.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it was about 800 line items in a Microsoft project plan.
Yeah, it took quite a while to create. I won't lie. It wasn't a half hour job. But again, we wanted to provide something that was of value and had everything in it that you could need. That then, if someone downloaded it, they weren't just, oh, okay, this is getting me started, but I've got a lot of work to do. That this is something that really would, as you say, build trust because it shows that we know what we're doing in terms of how to deliver one of these programs.
Yeah, we're going to dive into the details of that a little bit more in a second. But when someone hears this right now, they might think, why would someone do this, right? And we're really not, as you said, we're not talking about something that took half an hour. You gave a full project plan template for free away on your website at a time when these ginormous transformation projects were still managed using spreadsheets. So
Mhm.
someone could have just taken the spreadsheet and you could have saved them dozens and thousands of hours because not only did you bake your expertise in, because you worked at JP Morgan and Chase, you worked at large teams doing exactly that, but also then you worked with other companies in Juriba to help them transform. So you baked a ton of experience in there and you shortened that time that they would have had to create that project plan.
Mhm.
So if someone hears this right now, why would you do that if you then offer a software? Doesn't that sort of contradict each other?
Yeah, it does to a certain extent, and you're right. If I look back at it, and if I knew then that it would be downloaded thousands of times, then maybe we would have charged for it. So, but from the outset, I think that why did we create it was primarily Jariba's culture is all about helping people. Ultimately, we want to help people be successful. Now, sometimes that involves having a product sale, and that's all well and good. But sometimes it just means that you're creating that first step on the ladder in terms of someone understanding that Jariba is an expert in this space. And whilst you may not need us right now, then you may not deliver that program as well as you thought you would when you try it yourself the first time. There'll be another one. So when that second one comes around, having some credibility there in that space, and really, I suppose, trying to, in marketing terms, get yourself as that market leader persona, being able to build something that would have value for everyone that used it was a key part of the strategy, really, to building that credibility. This was all about credibility. It was all about helping people be successful. And whilst, like you say, it wasn't necessarily tied immediately to a software sale, what it was then tied to was future thought leadership around how to best practice some of the delivery around these operating system migrations. So the project plan was an easy lead in, and by not charging for it and by giving it away, we were able to then understand, that a customer had that problem right now. And I think anything in business is always related to a problem. What problem are you solving? The problem our software solved was that we could help manage large scale migrations. But the start point of the project manager's thought process will be, I need to understand the scope of this and what I need to do to get there. So also by providing a 800-line plan, we were also helping them to come to terms with the complexity of what it was they faced. And consequently, again, they would then look to us more. And this happened with a few customers like Air France KLM, who downloaded the project plan, said this was a great start. However, we then wanted to know, okay, but how do we approach, our application rationalization? How do we approach batching of devices? How do we approach, the hardware refreshes versus the in-place upgrades, et cetera, et cetera? And then you could build on the project plan by essentially adding thought leadership around best practices on how you would deliver it. Again, not necessarily tied exactly to our software, but it's a much smaller leap from, okay, these guys know what they're doing in this space. Actually, they have a product that can really help us here. And so it was trying to almost build that bridge between those two items.
Yeah, I just want to tease out one thing that you just mentioned. It is for an IT manager back then, it was incredibly hard until you got knee deep into the whole project and you were in the weeds, lost in the jungle, to really truly understand what the full scope of this whole transition is. It's not really comparative to, or you can't really compare it to cleaning out your pantry or sorting your Legos, but until you actually start to sort through the mess, you have no idea. I mean, at this point, most people didn't know even how many applications they had in their organization or how many devices. I mean, what are we looking at? I think 30% is sort of the number of devices that are somewhere hidden in our organization we forgot about. So you have to make sense of that mess, first of all. And that project plan really helped people to understand, holy, this is the things I have to do. How am I going to manage that?
Yeah, so when you start to look at the scope of one of these large scale programs, and in our case it was this operating system migration, it could be a mailbox migration, it could be a big virtual migration, yeah, anything, you tend to find that most organizations underestimate and under budget because you've got a load of tools, you've got data, it might be all over the place. You can bring in project managers and they can sift and sort things, and you end up effectively really underestimating the complexity and the amount of time and effort it takes to get started with these programs. And so a lot of really what we were trying to achieve with the project plan was to help people understand that the scoping of the project and then the subsequent analysis of that data was the thing that actually would accelerate you more than anything else. It's the hardest bit of every project. So a lot of these projects, if you look at their timeline against the number of deployments that they manage, most of these graphs are exponential curves. So a really, really slow start over the first few months, whilst all of this analysis and data gathering happens. And then finally, you get to a point where you've got processes and you've got devices or users that are ready to migrate. And then suddenly you can start to accelerate with some of the easy ones and then moving on. What we were trying to do as Juriba was really to invert that curve. So it was, one that you could deliver all of the quick stuff early and actually identify it early on. So you could get numbers on the board and you could then really manage the complex stuff in the tail, rather than what a lot of companies were doing, which was managing the entire 100% of the project early on and trying to understand the entire scope. So I think a lot of what we were doing with the project plan was just opening people's minds to the ways that you could deliver things a little bit differently. And that was effectively the bridge to our software, because being able to do that value added stuff, which is where project managers get so much kudos, is if you can deliver numbers early, that's the thing. Everyone really wants to be early on. I've spent X, I've delivered Y, versus I've spent X and we're about to deliver Y once we've got over all of these other hurdles. So that was really one of the areas that we felt we could add a lot of value once people got the project plan and then started to look at what the software could deliver for them in that particular phase.
So, what else did a project manager get out of it? They were able to understand the scope easier. They were able to plan easier. Maybe even get a business case done easier, because they can go to their superiors and say, "Hey, manager, look at this. This is what we have to do." Then, as you said, they were able to get numbers on the board quicker and really shine. Well, that was more for the software. But what else was it that was helping them with that project plan?
Yeah, so when a project manager looks at a project, the first thing that they'll always try and do is create a scope and a business case around that project. How long is it going to take? How much money do I need? What resource do I need? What buy-in do I need from the business units? What's the, what are the big blockers going to be? What are the things that need to get started now because they're going to take longer to remediate? All of those elements. So the feedback we got, and funnily enough, I had someone from KPMG I was speaking to who said, "Oh, I've used your project plan hundreds of times with clients," and essentially it's just for him. And this is a specific case, but for him, it was the fact that he knew this thing was complete and it worked. And actually, he could then take that to the next customer and the next customer and the next customer. They weren't necessarily our target audience, but the similar outcome is the same for the people we were trying to help in the audience, because it really was, here's something that you can trust that then you can take to your management. It's complete. No one's going to argue with an 800-line project plan. It looks like you've spent the time putting the effort in, and you could then break that down and you could say, okay, well, based on the project plan in this phase, because we had all of the sections lined out quite nicely, there was quite a few sections before you even got to deployment, you could then start to align things like budgets and resources to each section, and you could then start to build your business case, your customer communications presentations, all these sorts of things around what was in that project plan. So it wasn't just, a brute force, great, I've got a bunch of tasks and, a bunch of times against them. It really was something that you could then go and show value with. And that was ultimately, where the helpfulness came. How can we help the project managers look successful, be successful? And that was a key element of it, certainly when we were writing it.
Yeah. So I've tried to do the math and I wasn't able to get it to 100% because of the iterations our analytics went through. But I'm confident that it has been downloaded more than 12,000 times through the different plans. Now, you mentioned that it helped establish you as a thought leader, or it helped to build trust. It didn't necessarily immediately result in sales, but can you paint a picture what the impact of that Windows 7 or 10 or 11, as we continuously updated it, project plan template has been? And maybe what would have happened if you didn't publish that project plan?
Yes, it's a good question. I think the Windows 7 project plan had a huge impact on our business and still continues to do so. Not necessarily, as you say, in terms of direct sales, but certainly in terms of credibility of the business to be able to deliver these sorts of programs. Certainly in terms of our knowledge and expertise and our understanding of the problems that that persona faces when they're delivering that particular project. It certainly was, in terms of demand generation, a big door opener. I mean, as you say, we've downloaded maybe 12,000 of these. Of course, a lot of that audience just wanted the project plan. And that's fine. They don't necessarily maybe need our software or want our software at that point. They might just want a project plan. But there's a portion of that audience that absolutely wasn't just looking for a project plan. They may not have known it, but they were actually looking for a best practice in how they deliver one of these, because historically they had been very, very difficult to deliver, and most of them had run over time, run over budget, and consequently had quite a bad perception. Everyone was going into this, as every time we interviewed someone, no, I've lost my hair already because of the last one. I can't face another one. It's going to take too long, etc., etc. So it was a problem and a pain point that people had generally had in the past as well. And so when you've got that background and that foundation, then you are looking maybe subconsciously for a solution. And if we can bridge the gap between the problem and the solution, then that's where it's really having the impact. Like I say, it's also categorically been the lead in for some brand new opportunities. I mean, we still get them today. And as you know, we're talking about the Windows 7 project plan, but we've also done equivalent ones for Exchange to Office 365. We've done equivalent ones for Windows servicing and stuff like that. So, these get iterated every time there's a brand new project, they get updated, and we're still finding people downloading regularly today. So as a demand gen tool, it's without a doubt our most successful tool. And it's the thing that I'm still convinced just made the perfect tie between the problem and the solution.
Yeah. But you didn't leave it at that. I remember us having quite animated discussions around when Microsoft brought out their Windows 10 operating system and they announced this is going to be the last operating system. And all of a sudden the market was in a frenzy because now they had to figure out how to go away from big bang transformations and do it more as an evergreen, iterative, smaller updates. And people couldn't figure out how to do it and how to actually keep track of all the upgrades that were being pushed out. So I remember us having an article on the timeline when these releases happened, because people could not figure out, how am I going to plan to migrate and make it in time for the next upgrade?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So for the problem, when you're looking at changing from a big bang migration methodology to what we were terming at the time an evergreen migration methodology, so effectively regular cadence of updates, and this is what we're seeing today. What you tend to find is that the vendors like Microsoft will obviously eschew how easy and simple this has now become. Suddenly we've taken away all of the problems of the past. We don't need these great big resource and cost intensive processes to deliver something that's now just in business as usual. The reality, as you and I discussed at the time, was that the teams that were now tasked with delivering these regular updates were not project type people. Project type people tend to look at things, very proactively. It's okay, how can I get ahead? What do I need to do to deliver this, in the next month? People in business as usual tend to be much more of a reactive nature. So something's happened, there's a fire, I need to go and put it out. So consequently, the sort of persona that we were working with changed, but the problem really didn't. It was now a different persona that had the same problem, which is, how do I get all of these devices and applications from an older version to a newer version? Yes, it had become easier technically to do it, but a lot of the communication still needed to happen. We still had to schedule, if you're a huge company with 100,000 devices, you still got to schedule that. You can't just let everyone do it when they want, or suddenly hit a trading floor because hundreds of people clicked a button. It's just not the world that the large enterprises live in. You need more control. And so consequently, reiterating that project plan away from the big migration to the more ongoing cadence was just a set of tweaks that we made, but again, then had made that important bridge between the problem, which is, I have no idea how to approach this in this time, and the solution, which is, okay, well, there's a tool, and a project plan that will get you there, but there's a tool that you can put in place that will, a bit of software that will put in place that will actually help you achieve your goals.
Yeah, that was a very difficult sort of switch to make. But I remember that we put out a very disruptive piece of content with that Windows servicing timeline article that was viewed, I don't even know how many times, 60, 70, 100,000 times. It was like wildly successful and people shared it and referred back to it on a continuous basis because we constantly updated it. Sort of the similar idea of the project plan, be solving for a very clear pain point that your customer has and put it all out there, be like super helpful. And I would say that was a massive disruption to, like, no one else had something like this. And if I remember correctly, even Microsoft employees at some point commented on that article.
So yeah, when Microsoft announced that we were moving away and that moving away from Big Bang, moving away from Big Bang transformations, and that Windows was going to now be delivered in a very simple upgrade methodology. It was going to happen. I can't remember what it was. A very complex timeline, if I remember rightly. They had major releases and minor releases, and you could take some and not others, and you could be on a long-term branch or the regular upgrade branch. So what they'd engineered was actually quite complex in terms of understanding the decision as to what path you were going to take your business, but then B, how you were actually going to deliver it within the timeline. And so I remember talking with you and saying that actually, when you look at a large-scale enterprise and you look at the timeline that Microsoft are really giving you to deliver this, it doesn't work. There is no way that people can deliver that much upgrade capability and capacity within that timeline. And of course, over time, Microsoft changed their methodology, and now it's something that works. They had a lot of feedback on it. But back then, at the time, we were looking at another pain point. And the pain point was really, I guess, twofold. Number one, the information around what release was supported until which date wasn't very clear in aggregate. So you could find it for a single version, but you couldn't really find it for all of the versions, because obviously every 6 months they were releasing another one. So suddenly this thing got very complex. And then the second thing was that, and I remember you putting this together for us, is that you couldn't see it in a graphic. And the graphic was the thing that I always loved, because from that one single visual, you could immediately see that you were in a problem state. because if you weren't this far along your process in October and you had to finish it by January, you were in a lot of trouble because you were going to be 2 versions behind, and that was going to, cause you all sorts of security risk in your business. But without being able to see that, you just wouldn't have ever known it. And our customers were really scrabbling to try and make sense of all this, to try and keep up with the cadence, to, accept that what Microsoft were telling us, which is, look, we're not going to break anything every time an upgrade, but of course some things inevitably do break. There was events like different hardware suddenly stopped getting supported. Well, if you're on that sort of cadence, you need to plan for those sorts of things. You can't just deliver, 20,000 new laptops tomorrow. So actually then being able to identify again for the persona that we were talking to, the pain point that they had, and a helpful solution that again didn't sell any software for us whatsoever, but actually became, I think at one point we were looking at our statistics and it was probably 90% of all our website hits were just looking at this one page of information because we'd put it in aggregate and no one else had. And then I think at one point you could search for it and Juriba came above Microsoft in terms of, credibility for the information that was on that page. So yeah, it did get to a bit of a ridiculous level, I suppose, but it just goes to show that having the right, problem, pain point, understanding persona who was looking for this information and then providing the information would again drive traffic to your website. Not necessarily in this case it was a bit different. I wouldn't necessarily say that was all the right traffic, but again, there are customers within that set of people that went to look at that bit of information who then would have read other things that we then put in that article that said here's a call to action to something else. If you're really struggling with keeping up to date, then maybe download the project plan. That would then take them to step 2, etc., etc. So I think again, as a door opener, it was ever so successful.
Awesome. So in terms of just looking at the future real quick, because the whole inbound playbook doesn't really work with generative AI coming in, and people are also a bit saturated of everyone jumping on the content marketing train, right? Like if everyone put out something like this, it would be a different ballgame, but 9.9% of the content out there is just fluffy, generic, regurgitated content. So one of the things that really is going to make a difference in the next 2 years is disruptive content, like those things we just talked about today. Looking into the future, what would you recommend, having done this multiple times, having come up with such a disruptive idea? Where should someone start when they're thinking of, I want to do what's right, I want to build trust, I want to put out a piece of content that is disruptive, but how can they go about it? What would your advice be?
Yeah, so when you look at the future, and like you say, you're looking at AI and the ability to create a blog in 30 seconds and tweak it. The challenge there is that you get a lot of flattened content. It's useful to an extent, but I would argue that it's not particularly valuable. It may be valuable as part of lots of content, but on its own, it really struggles. So I think your point around how do you create the best collateral that really has value? When I look at that problem, I really look at it in terms of what's the thing that would help the persona that I'm looking at most. So number one in that process is to understand the persona that you want to help. So for us, we have 4 different personas, which immediately makes things a lot more complex. But we have digital workplace leaders, we have team leaders, we have project managers, and we generally have people like application packagers and testers that are doing the doing. So what you need to do is then say, okay, well, who are we selling to? Which persona are we selling to? And who is the persona that is most likely to get value from something that we can deliver? Then it'll be working back to the pain point. So as you mentioned before, you need to understand what's the biggest problem that these people face today, And is there an obvious thing that we can do to then help them along that journey? So a good example for us right now would be we have a new product which automates a particular role in organizations that's an application packager and tester. Now, obviously, if we're selling to that application packager and tester, then it's a very difficult sale because we're saying, okay, but we're going to automate the repeatable stuff so you can concentrate on the more complex stuff and you can, add a lot more value than you are today. But in reality, what we should be doing is talking to the digital workplace leader, because the digital workplace leader has a different agenda. They want to provide a better service through automation. They want to enable their application owners. They want to save money maybe, or increase capacity so that they can reduce the security risk in their environment. So what we've done on that one is to say, okay, well, what's the biggest thing that we can help that digital workplace leader with? And in our case, what they need is a business case. It needs a business case document because they want to make a change. So the thing that we're working on right now is to give a business case template that says you can have a couple of options with this particular product. You might be just looking to save money. You might be looking to provide a better experience. You might be looking to reduce your security risk, increase capacity on your team, maybe change the mode of operation, etc., innovate in your environment. The business case can support that, and it gives them something that they can go and sell the change to their organization. Because ultimately, this isn't necessarily a huge return on investment for them. It's a small one, but it's not a huge return on investment. What it's all about is modernizing. And in order to modernize, it's a different thing that you have to sell upwards. It's not just, right, we've got a project to do. It's going to cost us 5 million. We can do it for 3 if we use this tool. Now it's a case of, right, we're spending X on Y. If we still continue to spend X, can we make Y, Z? And that needs a lot more nuance, and therefore, something like a business case template becomes a lot more useful. And that will be both in pre-sales for us, but also for people to just understand, what does this thing look like? If I start to engage with Juriba, what does this look like? What am I trying to achieve? What's it going to actually cost me? What are the benefits that it will deliver? And so that I don't have to think about putting that together in my organization to go and sell it as a concept. So that's just an example, but that would be the thing that I would say, anyone who's struggling this should look at first, is get that pain point, understand the pain point, how you can help with the pain point, and therefore how you can then build that bridge between the pain point they have and your potential solution. And then obviously add all the thought leadership around it so that it's not just a one hit wonder. And like you just said, focus. It's very easy to just pump content out. Everyone's doing it. We're all swamped. No one has time to read it anymore. Forget that. People are looking for trust builders. They're looking for people that are credible, that have got experience. And you have to get that across now much more, that you're the one to come to that knows what they're doing, not that we've just thrown out another bit of content because we have to get 10 blogs out a day, whatever that may be.
Become the voice of trust, as Marcus Sheridan would say. So just to finish us up, I like to ask my guests what book they've read over the last 6 to 12 months that has changed their life. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a business book. If you have a different one that really stands out to you that is not a business book, that's fine too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll give you a business book. I mean, I've been reading Silo, and I really like the Silo books because they just trigger thought processes in your brain about what might happen. I remember when I was a very, very small child, my mum gave me this book about this vacuum cleaner that was it just would vacuum up everything. And the last page on this book was that the vacuum vacuumed itself up. And I remember even today, I'm still thinking, how on earth would that ever work? It just doesn't make any sense. So when I'm looking at the books, I'm looking at sort of, I quite like concepts. I like
Mhm.
concepts that make me think a little bit. So yeah, so Silo was one of those, similar to Hunger Games and these other ones. If I was looking at a business book, I went to a pep talks session quite recently where there's a bunch of CEOs turn up, and there was a guy there called John Andrew, and he'd written a book with someone called Rupert Morrison called Strategic Value Creation, and it's the first real business book that I think is actually targeted at CEOs, that really gives you a bit more tangible, stuff as to what you can do better. So in my case, I think sometimes we've struggled with the value of our board meetings. So it's something that anyone who's got into private equity would have been through this process. It's, how do you create a valuable board meeting where, you are actually talking about strategy regularly. For businesses like us, we don't, it's not that dynamic. Things don't change month on month. So how do you make these things more effective? And it included sections around, how to create better board packs, focus on what your strategic goals are, and then ultimately how do you create value within the business, which is what you were doing when you started the business. That's all you cared about. But as the business grows and gets bigger, you start to focus on other things, and that value creation can't be quite as agile as it used to be. So how do you keep that focus when you're still growing versus, all the other stuff that you now have to deal with, like people management and all these other kind of things that, come along. So that's one I would definitely recommend. Strategic Value Creation. It's a very, very good business book for CEOs.
Awesome. I will make sure to link that in the resource section below. So
Cool.
if someone wants to get in touch with you, Barry, how would they go about that? If they, I don't know, if you're open to this, pick your brain, or are facing any IT management issues, how would they be in touch?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. Obviously, just come straight through on LinkedIn. That's always probably the simplest route. Outside of that, you can get hold of me through the Juriba website. Just do a contact us. Equally, quite happy for people to send an email. The email's on the website. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that if someone just or even if someone's struggling, I'm always happy to. I don't always say that I've got the answers, absolutely don't. But, if someone just wants to chat something through on a problem that they're facing, then, yeah, I'd be delighted to listen and see if it's a similar challenge to ones that we've been through in the past. And if there's any advice that I might be able to give or questions that might point them in the right direction.
Awesome. Barry, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate our conversation and how awesome it's been to work with you. So thank you so much for coming on, being a guest on Trust Builders, and sharing your wide and very deep expertise. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Hannah. And yeah, thanks for all your support over the years. Definitely wouldn't have been able to do it without you. So yeah,
Oh,
very
thank
much
you.
appreciate that too.